Hi, I'm Richard Fleming. I'm from XTA. I'm going to give you a quick overview of how to go online to an APA amplifier using amp control and give you a simple guide to setting up a couple of sub loudspeakers. So basically, when we've actually got all our network connections all hooked up together and we run amp control, we click go online. Amp control gives you a list of all the network interfaces that your computer is connected to. We select the one which is the one which the APA amplifiers are on. We click OK. Amp control then goes out, finds all the amplifiers on the local network, pulls back all the settings and presents them to you in a format like this. So you can see amplifier name, and if you've got any output channels named, it just shows them to you, and any output meters which happen to be running if we've got signal connected to the amplifier. Before we get stuck in and start controlling the amplifier, let's have a quick overview of the processing that is within the amplifier. So the signal flow on this block diagram flows from left to right. So on our left hand side we've got all the inputs which are in the amplifier. We've got 4 analog inputs, 4 AES inputs and 4 network inputs, and we can use and route a combination of any of these. So in the first instance, these inputs feed a 12 by 12 output switch. So any of these inputs can be routed to the input processing. So just like in a 448, you've got a block of input processing and a block of output processing. So any of these inputs could be routed to this input processing. In this input processing, you've got all the kind of things which you're used to. Input gain, delay, 18 bands of parametric EQ, which can be switched to 11 different filter types. And later this year, we'll be launching dynamic EQ for APA. What this then feeds is a 16 by 8 output matrix. Now, to explain that quite simply, any of these analog inputs, AES inputs, network inputs, all the output of this input processing can be routed to the speaker outputs. Yeah. Additionally, any of that analog, AES, network, process inputs can be also routed onto the network. Now this gives you a lot of flexibility. For instance, you can route stereo inputs and Dante inputs to the local speaker outs. You could connect a radio mic receiver to analog input D. Use this block of input processing here to process your mic, EQ it how you like, and then you could route it to the local speaker outs, or you could actually route it onto the network, and that could be then connected to any APA amplifiers or digital console via a Dante connection. So you've got a lot of flexibility. To the right of this matrix then you've got your output processing, and this is very similar to what you'll find on a 448. So all those preset files and speaker settings which have been created for a 448 will port very easily to an APA amplifier. So you've got delay, an FAR filter block, high and low pass filters, 9 bands of parametric EQ, gain, program limiters and clip limiters. And we've got a few more things up our sleeve there which we'll be able to show you in the future, which will be available by a USB firmware upgrade. Well, let's jump back to amp control now and have a look at how that gets presented to you in amp control. So if we double click the amplifier now, what you get presented with is something which is quite similar to the block diagram, but you get an overview of all the processing which is currently going on in the amplifier. So on the left hand side we've got all our inputs and input meters, so the 4 analog inputs, 4 AES and 4 network inputs, and you can see here we've got sort of some signals coming in off the Dante network. If we would decide we want to use the AES input, basically it's just a case of clicking on this block here and flipping the A and B over to AES A and B and vice versa. So if you remember back on the block diagram, we said any of these inputs can be routed to any of the input processing. Where we do that is we click on this box here, and you can see now that we can route analog input A here, analog input B. And what we're going to do now is we're going to route a stereo input off the Dante network to C and D input processing. So we click this pull down here, select network input A, we same for input channel D, we select network input B. Right, so what we've got now is we've got a stereo input on analog A and B and a stereo input on network A and B being routed to the input processing block. Now what we want to do now is we want to route a mono sum of the network input to the speaker outputs. So what I do now is we go to these big yellow blocks here, the top one being the speaker output matrix. This is where we select what gets routed to these speaker processing here, and we've also got a network matrix where we can select what gets routed onto the Dante network. So we want to do the speaker matrix, so we double click the output matrix here and we're presented with a cross point matrix, of all the things which we can route to the speaker outputs. So if you remember earlier, we've got the output, the input processing, the actual analog inputs, AES inputs, all slots off the network. And in this particular instance, we want to route what's come off the network. So we know that processed inputs C and D are basically a stereo input off the network. So what we're going to do is we're going to route a mono sum to outputs 1 and 2. So once we've set up our routing as we see fit, we click apply changes, and what we'll see now is we can see output 1 and 2 getting routed from the network. Now what we want to do now is we can jump back now and we can see now the program and peak limiters on the output, so we know instantly basically our routing is working properly. Now what we need to do now, because we're going to pretend that we've got some subs connected to channels 1 and channels 2, we're going to set up our high and low pass filters. So we double click the high pass filter here, and this jumps us straight to the output filter tab. As you can see along the top here, all the processing, if you want to get in and edit it, it's just a case of double clicking those boxes and it will take you straight to that particular tab. So you can see here now we've got low A, so we're going to go for, double click there, 25, and we're going to go say to 180, and then we adjust our filter types to suit. 24 dB. We're quite happy with that. And then what we want to do is we go to high A. Now what we need to do now is what we really ought to do is rename these channels so it becomes easy for when someone comes to have a look at this system in the future. So we'll set this the same as before. That's good to go. So those are both the same. No, they're not. Right, now we've set up our low and high pass filters for our 2x18 bass loudspeakers. What we're going to do now is we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping and name these outputs properly. So low A is fine, high A is definitely not named correctly. So we're going to close down that, and then there's a box here which is called Set Amplifier Labels. We're going to click on that, and what gets presented to you now are all the things within the amplifier which you can actually name. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump down here, and that's also going to be, we're going to change that now to low sum A and B. So this is nice and intuitive, so when one of your techs comes to patch this system to loudspeakers, when he presses a channel select on the front panel, he can straight away see that this output needs to be patched to the bass loudspeakers. Click OK, and what we'll do now, you can see this name has been set up properly on the amplifier. We'll double click, and the next thing that we need to do, as we've done our routing, we need to set up our limiters. So we double click on the limiter box there, and that what happens now is that will take us to the limiter tab. And what we need to do is we get our manufacturer's datasheet, and the manufacturer's datasheet says that this loudspeaker is rated at 1500 watts RMS, and it's a 4 ohm load. So what we do is we head to the APA user manual, and in the user manual there is a table, a lookup table, which allows you to convert that 1500 watts into 4 ohm or whatever power or whatever impedance it is into a voltage at the output of the amplifier. So we find our power at 4 ohms column, we browse down till we hit about 1500 watts. Unfortunately 1500 is exactly there, and we then scan across and we can see that's 40 dBs at the output of the amplifier. So what we do then is we go back to the amplifier, select 40 from the pull down list, and then the next thing we do is to select the peak level that these particular speakers will be able to handle. And the general bit of advice I often give to people is bass drivers, it's typically 3 dBs, and mid-range drivers it's around 2 dBs. But the best thing to do is consult the manufacturer's datasheet to see what they recommend. So we'll double check that 3 dBs. We go back to our table and we have a look at 1500 watts is 40 dBs, and 3 dBs above that is 2993 watts. Well, we know that the APA will comfortably deliver that into a 4 ohm load, and this is something which you always need to check, because if you find that the amplifier that you're using is not able to deliver that 3 dBs, you then have to adjust your program limiter and peak limiter thresholds accordingly. So let's jump back to amp control now. We've got 3 dBs dialed in there, and that means we're ready to unmute and get going. So we jump back to the diagram, and some useful tips here are right click on a PC allows you to mute or unmute outputs, and if it was a tablet it would be a press and hold functionality. And what we're going to do now is, because we're happy with these settings, is we can jump to unit memories, and what we'll do now, save new settings to our XTA demo, which will now be available at the front panel of the amplifier for later recall. Useful housekeeping. Just while we're here, I'm going to click go offline, and we're going to go through the procedure of when you go back online to a system, because this is going to be very useful and might just save your skin one of the days. When you go online, basically the amplifier will search for any new devices, and you get the option then to basically map virtual devices in amp control with real devices. And in this particular instance it's reasonably intelligent. It's found a device called Isaiah, and the devices in the software is Isaiah. So the sensible thing to do here is match devices by ID. If you're slightly concerned about what's what you can actually do is you can identify the device, and if you click on a device in the found devices box here, click identify device, then you'll get dancing lights on the front panel of the APA, and you can be sure that you're mapping the correct virtual device to the real device. And then what you can do, then you can either send or retrieve. This is a very important dialog box, because if you were at a venue where you'd install the sound system and you send the settings, you need to make sure that you know exactly what you're sending, because you could lose all the settings in the venue. So in this particular instance, what we're going to do is we're going to retrieve the settings from the amplifier, and then we're good to go and we're in control of the amplifier. Right then, ladies and gents, this completes a very quick overview to APA and amp control. If you've got any questions, please see the contact details in the slide that follows. Thank you very much.